So we have a lot of people in the room right now. We have Commissioner Peirce beaming in on Zoom. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. Commissioner, we really appreciate your time. I know I mentioned this really briefly in person late last year, and I can't believe this is happening. Really thankful for your team's help in coordinating all of this. And again, for your time, I know you're very busy. So we'll get started. Before we start, I do want to give another thank you to our sponsors, Winston & Strawn, Coinbase, and World of Women Chronicle Labs, and also Bitwire. Without them, we really would not have this at all. So with that said, let's get started. This is SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, aka the original crypto mom. And it's just so cool that we have crypto mom talking to all the crypto moms in the room. And next to me is Thania, who is a partner at Winston Strawn. I'll let you say a few words as well.
Commissioner, thank you so much. We're truly very excited and honored to have you here today and to be able to talk with you about everything that's going on. It's been a very exciting few months. My name is Thania Charmani. I'm a partner here at Winston & Strawn. I'm a litigator focusing on digital assets, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
Okay, Commissioner, I know you usually have a disclaimer that you need to say, so we'll hand the mic to you.
I think she's still muted.
Oops.
Oh, we hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me. Good. Okay, great. Sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting, so I couldn't respond to anything. It's a delight to be with the real mamas of crypto. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you guys in person, but this is an honor for me. I do want to give my disclaimer, as you suggested. My views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Perfect. So we've prepared a list of questions, some of which we've gathered from the community beforehand. So we're going to step right into the questions, and Thania can get started. And if at any point, Commissioner, you want to address something additional, just let us know, and we'll step right into that.
Great.
Commissioner, it would be an understatement to say that the Commission's stance when it comes to the digital asset industry has changed over the past few months. You've held quite a few roundtables, quite a few meetings. Your message is one of cooperation. You invite industry participants to come in and talk to you. You've also said that you enjoy being wrong because it opens up a dialogue. I mean, it's a refreshing thing to hear from a regulator, and I'm just a little bit curious as to whether over the past few months, during all of these conversations, something has surprised you or urged you to rethink something that you held as a given.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that certainly has come out is that, and it's not that this was a total surprise, but it is difficult to provide very clear guidelines about when, if you have a token offering, the token itself is not the security typically, unless the token has characteristics that make it a security in and of itself. But trying to figure out when it makes sense to have that line, when does the investment contract actually separate out? That's obviously a very difficult question. It's been one that a lot of us have been thinking about for a long time. But I think seeing the variety of views about how to think about that has been interesting. And then hearing different people's views on whether decentralization is even something that we should be thinking about, or should we be thinking about this through more questions around control rather than decentralization. Those are some issues that I think are interesting. I will say, it is also frustrating a little bit that things do take a long time, right? And I knew that this would be a frustration. I knew that it would be a frustration for me and for folks out there who are trying to actually do things. But I think the amount of interest in doing things, it really, I think when the attitude changed, when the administration's attitude changed, when the SEC's attitude changed, watching the number of people coming in who want to try something in this space, has been both encouraging, but also a little bit surprising.
And I think that change that has created a lot of enthusiasm in the industry also has highlighted a little bit of a hesitation on behalf of certain industry participants to actually come in and talk with the staff, because based on the previous SEC stance, there were industry participants who came in good faith to talk with the commission and then found themselves the subject of enforcement actions. And it's somewhat disheartening to see that this type of hesitation persists, because participants say, well, what if there is a new administration and then we have to deal with retroactive consequences of coming in and providing the information? How would you address those concerns?
Well, I certainly understand it. I mean, we've spent the last several years as a regulator building up a lot of bad will, and now we're trying to turn that around. And I think one way to do that is to have as transparent a process as possible, which is what we're trying to do. We've been very transparent about what the issues are. You mentioned that we've had a number of roundtables where we've really tried to bring people in and have the conversation publicly. We've gotten a lot of written submissions, and we've also been told people about the meetings that we're holding and those kinds of things. So I think that transparency helps to breed more confidence. And I think also the fact that the commission has already taken a number of really important steps, whether that is saying we're not going to move forward with certain enforcement actions, or whether that's saying we're putting out guidance on issues that people have had questions about for a long time. That so far has been staff level guidance. I'm hoping that we can move that up to rulemaking and commission level guidance in more instances. And I think all of that will help to build confidence. But I think the most important message I have is the best way to protect the industry in the future is to build things now that are so important that no administration will want to get rid of them. And so in order to do that, we really have to have those conversations with people in the industry. They need to come in and talk to us because we have limited time. And so if you don't come in and talk to us and tell us what you need relief from or clarity on, then we'll probably work on some other issue. And so I would say that's a reason for people to come and talk to us. And I really, I think one unfortunate trend that I'm seeing is that there is a view now that, well, we don't need to come talk to the SEC because anything goes, we can do whatever we want, and there's never going to be any problem for us. And I think that is not the best way to move forward. I think it really does help us to know what people are trying to do, what they want to do, and then we can think about ways that we can provide a framework for that to happen in a way that makes sense. We're all concerned, obviously, about fraud in this space, and so that is something that we will continue to be vigilant for. And I hope people will also help us in that mission as well, of identifying bad actors when they see them and tell us about them, so that we can either ourselves as a regulator, or by making references to other regulators, go after the bad actors in this space.
And we do see in the community a lot of enthusiasm to build new things, to go ahead with projects that for years have been stalling because of this fear of the regulator that would come in and stop the project. And I'll tell you, on behalf of the legal community, we do encourage people now to come in and talk to the SEC. We certainly don't say that you can get away with anything. And one of the big effects of this change of stance is that now the community is also talking to the public. For a while, there was this mentality that we shouldn't be talking to people who are invested in the success of the project in any way, because we're afraid of what type of information can be used by a regulator. This is changing a lot, and I think it's due to your stance and the Commission's openness to discussing all various projects and the clarity that you're providing during the roundtables and also the guidance that has been issued. But there is still this question of whether we need Congress to also act. Obviously, we have legislation that has progressed. We have the Genius Act that just passed through the Senate. Do you believe that we also need a broader bill, a market structure bill, to address any gaps? Or do you think that now that we have regulators that more open to discussing with the community. The existing laws cover the majority of what the industry is presenting.
Well, first of all, I think your point is so important about how the approach that we took in the past actually made information harder to come by. And that was one of my real concerns about it. You know, even for people who are crypto skeptics, I would say to them, it makes no sense to have a regulatory regime that actually punishes people for making disclosures to investors. And so we really needed to flip that script and say, no, we want there to be information out there. We want you to be talking to people who are buying your tokens and telling them the information they need to make a good decision about whether to purchase those tokens. And so I think that's something that we will continue to spend time thinking about, building frameworks within which those disclosures can happen effectively and in ways that clearly have a place within the regulatory framework. So in terms of Congress, I am very happy that Congress is taking up these issues. They're not easy issues to write legislation about. I worked in the Senate, on the Senate staff years ago, and I know just how difficult it is to write legislation and to do that well. So I'm really happy they've taken up the topic, both the topic of stablecoins and the topic of market structure through the Clarity Act and other similar efforts in the Senate. I think that there certainly are areas where if Congress does not step in and do something, there will not be a framework. So if you think about a trading platform that just trades crypto assets that are not securities, which, I've taken the position that most of the crypto assets out there, as they're structured now, are not securities. So those kinds of trading platforms would not have a regulator unless Congress decides to put one in place, which is one of the things that the Clarity Act does. In other areas, we could use a little extra authority. So right now, if you're an SEC regulated trading platform, an ATS, or even an exchange, you can trade non-security things on that platform. It would be helpful for us to have authority over the non-security leg of a transaction. And so that's something that Congress can give us. But in other areas, there are many things that we can do under our existing authority. Congress really was forward thinking when they were writing the securities laws, in the sense that they knew things would change. And so they gave us a lot of exemptive authority that we could take particular rules and say they don't apply under these conditions. And so we are working with the authority that we have now to do some of these things. I think we can write a good framework around disclosures, for example, under the authority that we already have. When someone's making and offering an investment contract of which a token is the object, we can write bespoke rules there. So there's a lot that we can do without Congress intervening, but seeing Congress working on putting together a holistic approach is helpful. And I think the work that we're doing now can inform the work they're doing and will inform the implementation once those pieces of legislation go into effect.
I actually have a follow-up point to something you just said. You said SEC could use more authority with the non-security leg of non-security assets. Do you think you can elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so you can imagine a trading platform, for example, an ATS, which is like an exchange light. You can imagine that someone might want to have on that trading platform tokenized securities, like traditional stocks tokenized, alongside stablecoins and Bitcoin and ETH, for example, right? And so if you wanted to let people do transactions where one leg was ETH and the other leg was a tokenized stock, that can happen on a platform now that we regulate, but we would only have authority arguably over one leg of that transaction, the securities leg. And so it could be helpful for us to get the matching authority over the other leg of that transaction.
Got it. Thank you. So legislation is indeed extremely difficult to craft and to craft well, which then leads me to think, how would we do this in even the harder place, which is internationally? Because part of the dream of tokenization of anything is that anyone can participate, no matter where they are, no matter their economic strata. But in order for that to really happen, you actually need rule harmonization, as in as many places as possible. So from your perspective, is that actually happening? Are you participating in any sort of efforts to support, I guess, cross-border implementation of tokenization?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's important to recognize that this is not a new problem in the markets that we regulate. The securities markets are also international, and so we have experience working with our fellow regulators through multilateral organizations like the International Organization of Securities Commissions. We also have a lot of experience working bilaterally with our counterparts internationally. And so that experience will be helpful as a base for the work that we do in the crypto space. And then some of those organizations have already taken up crypto as a topic that there's been work on. The work hasn't always been in the direction that I might want it to go, but at least there is cooperation there. Another piece of it to remember is that now that the US has embraced the idea of providing regulatory clarity in this space, I think a lot of other jurisdictions will look to what we do as perhaps a model for their own regimes. So I think if we do this well, I think we can be a leader in establishing a reasonable approach to regulating in this area. The other thing that I think we will work on is, and it's a tool that we've used in other areas, but that's mutual recognition, with the idea that all jurisdictions don't have to have exactly the same framework. If we're all sort of striving for the same objectives, you can mutually recognize one another's regulatory regimes, and that can be a way to make these things work. Another point I would make is that I've talked a lot about the possibility of doing some sort of an experimentation sandbox here in the US, and that would allow people to try things in a small scale commercial experiment, with the idea that they could scale that up over time, and that we would try to have a way for them to get into an exemptive regime that would work for them. But that's something that we can also try with other jurisdictions. We could do that as a cross-border type experiment for projects that we're trying to offer something in different jurisdictions. And that's a conversation that I've had with international folks and will continue to have. I have a plan to be over in the UK next month to speak with some people about these kinds of ideas. And so and we'll continue to reach out to other jurisdictions to gauge their openness to something like that.
So also on the topic of rules and legislation, I would love to talk about any potential safe harbors that we can maybe craft here in the US. So for many, many years, I think lawyers in this space have tried to propose language that could potentially be a safe harbor for tokens to be outside of the securities law framework, or at least not subject to all of the registration requirements under Section 5. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think a safe harbor would still be viable right now. What are the hurdles that are preventing that from happening, and what's changed, and if that could even be a reality?
I mean, I do think it could be a reality. And as you point out, this has been something that a lot of lawyers in this space have been talking about for a long time. And it was those kinds of conversations that led me to suggest quite a long time ago now, time flies, but to suggest a safe harbor for token offerings. And the idea would be that you would still be subject to the anti-fraud rules, but that registration would be tailored so that you could or the disclosure would be tailored so that you could make disclosures that were meaningful to people buying tokens, but you weren't we weren't pretending that you were a company that was going public after having been in existence for many years, which is a model that just doesn't really fit very well in this space. So I think something like that is still something that we're thinking about, and I think it could be quite useful, giving people the confidence to do a token offering in a way that makes sense and really does elevate relevant disclosures to the place that they should be, and then provides a path for people as the project decentralizes or as control diffuses, however you want to think about that, and provides a path for the disclosure obligations to fall away. At that point, you don't have the same kind of concerns around information asymmetries anymore. So I think that's something that we are actively exploring. I mean, the hurdles are that, as with any commission level action, it does take some time for something like that to come into being. But, certainly welcome thoughts on how something like that should be crafted.
And now that I think about it, I think the lawyers at one point actually put draft language on GitHub about the safe harbor. Yeah, I remember that now. That was really cool. So another topic that lawyers have talked about forever in this space is who can be a qualified custodian. So, the definition of a qualified custodian has been a topic for a long time. Would you be able to provide an update on the SEC's current stance and any recent developments that people should track on that definition?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to underscore that custodian can mean different things across the different areas that we regulate. So for broker dealers, investment companies, investment advisors, there are different considerations around custody, and we're thinking about the custody issue in all of those contexts. There has been particular focus on qualified custodians under the Investment Advisors Act. And I think it's important for people to know, sometimes, in the crypto world, you think, oh, this issue is just a crypto issue. But the questions around qualified custody have actually arisen outside of the crypto context as well, specifically, thinking about state chartered entities and how they fit into that. So that's something that we are thinking about. It also matters what asset you're talking about and whether or not that asset is a security. For purposes of the Advisors Act, as it's and the custody rule as it is written now only covers securities and funds. And so that's important to remember. For some of these things, if it's not a security, the rules might be different. So we're thinking about all of these kinds of things, and I hope that we can provide some additional guidance and help for people. Again, I do encourage people to tell us if you have specific questions. It is helpful if we can understand where you think the pain points are. And another point I should make is that the SEC under Chairman Gensler had proposed to revamp the custody rule and change it into something called the safeguarding rule, which would have been much more expansive on many fronts. And we got a lot of pushback on that, not only from people in the crypto world, but from lots of people with lots of concerns about that. That rule is not going forward, but I think others have suggested that the custody rules may in general still need updating. And so that may be something that we work on with respect to crypto and or more broadly.
So a question we received was actually on that point, pretty nuanced. It was, how does the control and ownership test within the possession of control concept relate to UCC Article 12?
Yeah, I mean, there's been work done under UCC Article 12 around custody and thinking about control in that context. I mean, I think that helps inform how we think about things, but it's not controlling, no pun intended, controlling on how we think about things. There's a whole set of lore and law that specifically relates to custody under the Advisors Act, and that's sort of something that we have to think about it within the context of Investment Advisor Act specific lore and law. I should put it in the other order, law and lore.
So another concept that's unique to crypto with regards to possession and custody are the times where there's actually no person or necessarily maybe even institution custodying anything. If someone creates a vault and an asset is locked there by a program, how does that shift the thinking that people should have? Like, what framework should people start using to think about those situations?
Well, again, I think we're trying to think about the latest developments and how people are holding things, how custody arrangements. And, I'm not going to give a definitive legal view on that, but I will say, again, if people have specific questions that they can formulate and bring them to us either as a no action letter request or as a request for an exemption or a request for guidance, we're happy to think about those things. And I think it is important for us to understand what best practices in the industry are so that we can craft our rules and guidance with that in mind.
I want to go back to something that you.
I lost you there. I'm not hearing you.
Commissioner, can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can. Yep.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned in the beginning about whether decentralization is still relevant in our discussions on how to regulate many of the projects that we're seeing, or whether we're shifting to this concept of control. And I think that will also come into play when it comes to any type of safe harbor framework and as we're thinking about the industry going forward. Can you expand a little bit on this, what you're seeing and what your views are?
Yeah, well, I think some people have suggested that control fit is a concept that is more consistent with how the securities laws approach things. I mean, to some degree, when I look at the issue, I think similar issues come up, whether you're looking at it through a control framework or through a dispersion of control framework or through a decentralization framework. Some of the difference may really be semantics, but I think we should always go back to thinking about what is the fundamental purpose of the securities laws when we think about something like disclosure and registration. You know, we're thinking about someone is going to raise money from people who don't have all of the information of the person raising the money. And so we want to make sure that the material information gets into the hands of the people who are buying something or who are then investors in something. And so at what point is all of the information out there? At what point is there no one person anymore who is the locus of that information? I think trying to think about it through the purposes of the securities laws makes sense. I guess another thing I would say is that I want to end up in a place where projects that have a reason for decentralizing are able to do that and are able to do it in a way that they can, clearly then exit from regulations that don't make sense anymore. But I don't want to force premature decentralization. I don't want to force people just dropping projects in order that they don't have responsibilities anymore so that the project actually doesn't get built. And there are other instances in where decentralization may not be the objective, right? And so what I hope that we can achieve is a regulatory framework that allows decentralization or dispersion of control to happen where that is kind of the point, and allows folks that want to have some aspect of a project remain centralized or under control of a particular company or set of people, that they can do that in a way that makes sense under the law. So I'm trying to, I guess, give people optionality is really important to me as I think about this.
And there are projects, for example, several DeFi protocols that are truly decentralized, that operate without centralized control. And that makes frameworks that are aimed at intermediaries less relevant. At the same time, as the industry becomes more accessible and more people are interested in getting involved or investing in the industry, you have calls for heavy regulation even in these areas. How do you reconcile that when you have areas where intermediation risks or information asymmetry no longer play a role? And if we look at the purpose of the securities laws, it might be that less intervention by the government is better while there is still a call for protection.
Yeah, well, maybe I have a little bit of a cop-out in the sense that I have been pretty upfront about my approach to regulation, which is, obviously Congress has given us the statutes at the SEC that we have to administer, and I have to do that as well as possible. But there are instances where you have discretion in how you think about these things. And so when I think about regulation, if two people want to engage in a transaction directly with one another and they want to do that peer to protocol, right, person to protocol, right? They want to just directly interact with a DeFi protocol. I don't really see why regulation has a place to step in there. That's a choice that that person is making to engage with that protocol. And if the person wants to have the can go through a centralized intermediary. But if it's a truly decentralized protocol, I'm not sure who we would regulate. Some people would say, well, you should regulate the developer. And my argument to that would be, no, I mean, you write a piece of code, you put it out there, people might use it for things, for lots of things, and that's really not within your control. You've just written a piece of code and you've put it out there for people to use or not. So I think in a situation like that, I really don't know where regulation would go. I don't think it would be appropriate for regulation to go to the developer. You have other people who say, well, you should go and you should regulate the front end through which people access that decentralized protocol. My argument there is, well, if the front end is really just providing the glove through which the hand goes and touches the decentralized protocol, I'm not really sure I understand why it would be appropriate to apply securities like regulation to that front end. So I tend to have the view that we can live in a world where we say to people, look, you can have the option to do these things directly. I mean, that's the whole point of this technology in many ways. It's to disintermediate. It's to enable things to happen without having a centralized intermediary. We all know the problems that arise when you have centralized intermediaries. We've seen those problems in traditional finance. We've seen those problems in the crypto world as well, where you have centralized people or entities doing things, taking people's money. They often do bad things with it. So we should carve out an area where people who want to just actually use the technology in its raw form, where they want to be able to go to open source code, engage with it on the terms that are there for all to see and that are equally accessible to everyone. That should be their option to do it, but they shouldn't expect to have a big regulatory framework around that. For others who would prefer a more regulated approach, there will be plenty of centralized entities that will offer access to or somehow incorporate decentralized technologies in the services they offer to people. And in those instances, we have someone that we can regulate. So that would be my preferred approach, is to really have this optionality out there for people and not to try to jam truly decentralized things into a regulatory framework that is made for regulated entities.
In recent months, the Commission has issued very much needed guidance on topics like stablecoins, meme coins, staking, disclosures. Are there certain issues that during those discussions you find it a little bit harder to tackle, that it's on your to-do list with like a red tick next to it saying, I don't know how we're going to address that?
I mean, I think in some of those instances where we've provided guidance, it has been really important to do that because there have been questions. I think sometimes people think whenever there's something bad going on, that means the SEC has jurisdiction. And so I think that's one area where I've found it a little bit frustrating, in the sense that we are not an all-purpose regulator. We have a very defined mission from Congress, and we're trying to work within the parameters that Congress set. There are obviously areas where there are difficult questions. We've talked about staking. There are also liquid staking issues. Those are ones that we have to think about. I think we could provide some guidance around NFTs. There are some areas that are clearly not within our space, but there are other areas where, you know, you can take a stock and turn it into an NFT. So obviously that would be within our space. And so sometimes it can be hard to, you know, we're all, many of us at least at the SEC are lawyers, so you've always got to give the facts and circumstances disclaimer too, right? You can take something, you can take a meme coin and you can offer it in a way that is a securities offering, just as you can take a ferret or whatever animal you want, and you can offer it in connection with an investment contract, and that ferret doesn't itself become a security, but it can be offered in a securities offering. So I think some of that nuance can be a little bit difficult to convey sometimes.
We might see a ferret meme coin later today.
Yeah, there might be $ ferret soon. But crypto people, we talk about crypto all the time. You know, we forget that in terms of market cap, in terms of attention. We really are just a really small subset of everything. So what other major regulatory or enforcement priorities are demanding your attention? And what are some broader market developments that the crypto industry should pay attention to?
Well, there is a lot that's going on at the SEC. We have a new chairman who has an interest in many areas. And so I think one area that hasn't gotten attention during recent years where we'll be spending more time is thinking about capital formation more generally. So thinking about how do small businesses, how can they raise capital in a way that's cost efficient and makes sense? And then thinking all the way up to bigger companies. Why aren't companies going public anymore? Trying to solve that issue, making sure that the market structure rules work for companies, making sure that the IPO rules work for companies, making sure that we've got our disclosure mandates properly calibrated. Yesterday, the commission had a roundtable on executive compensation disclosure. And then we've got a lot of bread and butter rules that maybe deserve some rethinking, whether that's record keeping, whether that's how firms have to communicate with their shareholders, whether that's transfer agent rules. There are a lot of rules that do require us to rethink, probably in light of modern technology, modern ways that people communicate, that firms communicate with their customers. And I think there's just a lot of exciting work to be done. And so I've said, I don't think crypto is actually the most important issue on the SEC's radar, but we've wasted a tremendous amount of resources over recent years in this space because we haven't used the right tools to address the problem. If we had put out a reasonable regulatory registration regime, I think we wouldn't have seen a lot of the problems that we'd seen. If we really had clear rules, we could spend less time thinking about this, but also importantly, people who are trying to build things could also spend less time thinking about what are the rules, what do I do, how can I engineer my project so that around this ambiguity that's out there. And so I really think we'll get to a better place when crypto is just one of the many things that the SEC and other regulators think about. It doesn't have to be front and center. And when people need help in thinking through the rules, they can come in and talk to us. But in general, the rules will be pretty clear.
That sounds like a wonderful day. We also want to get to that point. As the industry, we talked about this before, it becomes more accessible. We see a lot of TradFi institutions now being more open to adopting the technology and getting involved in the projects. We are expanding and it feels like everything is happening very fast and there are a lot of blind spots. If you have to put on your crypto mom hat, what do you think the industry needs to look out for when it comes to navigating this quite expansive time in terms of growth and in terms of reach?
Yeah, well, I think people always, when there's a period of growth, need to be careful not to get swept up just by the enthusiasm and to really think, okay, where does it make sense to tokenize something? Where does it make sense to incorporate blockchain technology? Where does it make sense for people to get exposure to crypto assets? And not just assume because it's crypto and the numbers are going up now that it's going to be great for everyone at all times. And so I think we will serve ourselves well if during this time of enthusiasm and excitement, there's also some cold rationality that's injected into that, and that people really are thinking, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Do crypto assets or does blockchain technology really help solve this problem? Is this the right place for these assets to be? And making sure that you're thinking about protecting the customers and thinking about this resilience of the system, because none of us will be served well if there are massive problems. Now, as you mentioned, there are a lot of traditional financial institutions who are very interested in this space now, and this is kind of what I've been surprised by it on the one hand, but on the other, I assume that one of the reasons there hadn't been as much interest from traditional financial institutions in the US is because we had this, completely impossible regulatory environment. And now that there's a chance, they're thinking about ways that they can give their customers access to assets, or ways that they can think about tokenizing or getting involved in custody or whatever it may be. And so I think there will be some benefit from that in terms of having the many years of experience that those institutions have in traditional financial markets and applying those lessons in crypto markets. I think that can be positive. Part of what I worry about, of course, as a regulator, is that as we develop rules and as we think about guidance, we're not developing rules in a way that creates regulatory barriers so that crypto native firms can't participate or smaller firms can't participate. So really making sure that we have a competitive market, because I think ultimately having a vibrant competitive market is the best way to both protect investors, but also to protect the resilience of the financial system.
That's very interesting. And I might use the enthusiasm, but with caution advice with my clients, but also with my son at some point. It applies to everything. Joyce?
So Commissioner, you are crypto mom because for so many years you have been the steadfast and dissenting voice for, I would like to say reason, but in this space. So, and that's a really tough thing to do. So what drives you to remain engaged? Are there any personal experiences that you can share that have shaped your approach to how you do regulation and approach public service?
Well, I'd say, I mean, my role of being a voice of dissent is so much easier than what I saw people confronting who are actually trying to build things in this space. And that has been my inspiration. It's people who, despite the regulatory ambiguity, have believed in the importance of the work that they were doing, and they have tried to move forward even with concerns about whether there would be potential regulatory implications, right? Trying to build in that ambiguous environment is very difficult. And so I'm really inspired by people who have an idea and they move forward with that idea. Obviously, I want people to be building who are actually trying to solve real problems. And it's those people who have inspired me, people who have seen a problem, strive to solve it. And that's what has kept me engaged in this. I do think it's important to have new voices coming in and thinking about how to regulate in this space. So, my voice is just one temporary voice in this space. And I'm looking forward to seeing some people who have real experience building in this space coming in and joining us on the regulatory side to think about how to build a good regulatory framework in this space.
And we know your term is ending
It's over.
soon. So I guess, is it over? We'll miss you so much. Can you share a little bit about how that works and I guess what you're thinking about next?
Yeah, so I mean, my term ended on June 5th. And so what happens, people wonder, well, why are you still here? A lot of people wish I weren't. But you can stay on for a little while, actually, quite a while longer until you get replaced. So it can be up to a year and a half. So I don't have immediate plans to go. And I think that, I hope that I can still be helpful in this process of trying to bring some clarity. And then once I leave, I'll think about what I'm going to do next. I'm not thinking about that yet, except that I'd love to go back to Ohio, where I'm from.
Well, we're not ready for the crypto mom to leave. We haven't reached that point.
I think the answer is a long vacation. Yeah.
Well, I just went to Alaska, and I will say it's very beautiful there. It's a stunning place. So I would go back there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Commissioner. Elena, if you're there, thank you so much for all your help in coordinating. It's really been such an honor for us to have you here, and we just really appreciate your time. We know how busy you are.
Well,
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
And thank you for the great questions and the great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.